Croesus, the king whose name became a byword for wealth, ruled a kingdom that sat on a river carrying natural gold and silver straight into his treasury. But the gold in that river isn't actually the interesting part of Lydia's story. The interesting part is what the ancient economies around Lydia were already doing with wealth long before Croesus was born.
Across the ancient Near East, temple and palace treasuries in Mesopotamia, Anatolia, and Egypt operated on a documented practice. A fixed portion of trade income, harvests, and tribute was set aside first before anything else was spent and deposited into a treasury or temple store. Historians studying these economies describe this as one of the earliest forms of systematic reserve building in human history. We don't know if Croesus personally followed a fixed percentage rule. What we do know is that the entire economic culture that produced a fortune legendary enough to still be quoted today was built on the same underlying principle. Allocate first, spend what's left, not the other way around.
That one-sentence principle is, almost word for word, what modern personal finance calls paying yourself first. And the reason it still gets repeated 3,000 years later isn't tradition, it's math. Let's go through the actual numbers, because this is where the principle either convinces you or it doesn't. Start with where most people actually stand today. The personal savings rate in the United States has hovered in a range of roughly 3 to 7% of income over the past 2 decades, spiking briefly during unusual periods like 2020, then falling back down. That means the average household is saving well under half of what a basic 10% rule would ask for, and often closer to a third of it. Here's why that gap compounds into something much larger than it looks. Take 2 people, both earning $50,000 a year, both getting an average 7% annual return, a reasonable long-term average for a diversified stock portfolio. One saves 10% of income, $5,000 a year, starting at age 25. The other saves nothing until age 35, then tries to catch up by saving 20%, $10,000 a year, from 35 to 65. The first person, saving $5,000 annually for 40 years at 7%, ends up with slightly over $1 million by age 65. The second person, saving twice as much per year but starting 10 years later, ends up with roughly $760,000 over 30 years, despite contributing more money in total contributions along the way. The first 10 years of saving weren't just 10 years. They were worth more than the extra decade of doubled contributions that came after. This is the entire argument for starting the percentage now at whatever income you currently have, instead of waiting for a bigger income to start later. Now here's the part almost nobody accounts for. It's not just about the math. It's about whether the money ever actually gets saved in the first place. And this is where behavioral economics has produced some of the clearest data in the entire field of personal finance. In 2004, economists Richard Thaler and Shlomo Benartzi published a study on a program called Save More Tomorrow, tested with employees at several U.S. companies. Employees who were asked to commit in advance to automatically increasing their savings rate with each future pay raise, rather than deciding manually each time, ended up nearly quadrupling their savings rate over roughly 4 years, moving from an average around 3.5% of income to over 13%, with the vast majority sticking with the plan rather than opting out. The mechanism wasn't willpower. It was removing the decision entirely. The money moved into savings before it ever hit a checking account where it could be spent. exactly the same structural principle behind those ancient treasuries, setting aside grain and metal before anything else was distributed. Croesus's economy didn't succeed because Lydians had more self-control than everyone else. It succeeded because the system moved the resources first, automatically, as a structural rule rather than a daily decision. This distinction, automatic versus manual, shows up again and again in savings research. Studies on retirement plan enrollment consistently find that when saving requires an active opt-in decision, participation rates often land somewhere in the range of 40 to 70%, depending on the workforce. When the same plan instead requires an active opt-out, meaning employees are automatically enrolled unless they choose to leave, participation commonly rises above 90%. Same options, same math, completely different outcome, purely because of whether the default requires action or requires none. This tells you something uncomfortable if you've ever tried to save whatever's left over at the end of the month. That approach puts the 10% at the very back of the line, competing against every other spending decision you make throughout the month. Decisions that happen in the moment, with full attention, while your future savings sit passively, waiting to see if anything survives. It almost never does. Not because people lack discipline, but because that's structurally the hardest possible position for money to occupy. Flip the order, and the entire dynamic changes. If 10% leaves your account the same day your income arrives, before rent, before groceries, before anything else, you're no longer choosing between saving and spending every day. You made one decision once, and the system executes it automatically from then on. This is the exact structural shift the Save More Tomorrow study measured, and it's the same shift ancient treasuries built into their economies by setting aside grain and metal before distribution, not after. Flip the order, and the entire dynamic changes. If 10% leaves your account the same day your income arrives, before rent, before groceries, before anything else, you're no longer choosing between saving and spending every day. You made one decision once, and the system executes it automatically from then on. This is the exact structural shift the Save More Tomorrow study measured, and it's the same shift ancient treasuries built into their economies by setting aside grain and metal before distribution, not after. There's a specific trap worth naming directly because it undoes this principle quietly over years without ever feeling like a mistake in the moment. It's called lifestyle inflation, the tendency for spending to rise in near lockstep with income, so that someone earning double what they used to still ends up saving roughly the same dollar amount, or sometimes even less, because every raise gets absorbed into a slightly larger apartment, a slightly nicer car, slightly more frequent takeout. Research on saving behavior consistently finds that raises and bonuses get saved at dramatically lower rates than steady baseline income, unless the saving percentage is fixed and automated at the moment the raise happens, not decided fresh each time. This is precisely what the Save More Tomorrow program targeted directly. Instead of asking people to save more starting today, competing against their current spending habits, it asked them to commit to saving a slice of income they hadn't received yet. Future raises were split automatically between spending and saving before the money ever became part of anyone's daily lifestyle. That's the entire trick behind why the number climbed from 3.5% toward 13% with so little resistance from participants.
Put the pieces together, and the 10% rule stops looking like ancient folklore or a rounded-off guess. It's a documented structural pattern showing up in temple economies thousands of years before modern banking existed, in retirement plan enrollment data, in a specific published behavioral economics study, and in straightforward compound interest arithmetic that doesn't care what era you're living in. Allocate first, automatically, before spending decisions get a chance to compete for that money. Do it now, at whatever income you currently have, because the earliest years of compounding are worth more than doubled contributions made a decade later. And build in the automation, not the willpower, because every large study on this subject points to the same conclusion. The system succeeds where daily discipline usually fails. That's the actual rule, sitting underneath the phrase, rich as Croesus. Not the gold in the river, the much older, much more boring discipline of setting a portion aside before anything else touches it, repeated consistently enough for long enough that mathematics does the rest of the work without needing to be reminded.